All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's just past 1:15, and we're going to start on today's witness list, and we have a full schedule today. I did not do much on a draft of the BAA letter enough to share with anybody, but if we manage to have enough time towards the end of the day, I'll throw it up and we'll discuss the points that we've made, that we talked about last week, and go over them and see what we want to add to the letter. They are, as I mentioned today in caucus, there will be the schedule for us to get the letter is as soon as possible, but the Appropriations Committee will be doing a preliminary vote on the BAA on Friday, and then they'll have a hard vote on Monday. So we need to get our information, our recommendations to them. Like I said, if possible, by the end of business tomorrow to get it to them. So with us today, we have Kathleen Burke, who is going to follow up on her testimony from last week. She's here in 3D. Then we're going to have a bill introduction and a walkthrough on H686, which is an act relating to measuring progress towards statewide and regional housing targets. Then we will have an introduction and a walkthrough on an act relating to the creation of the Housing Board of Appeals. And then we will have a conversation. So those of you who are here for the conversation specifically on the Budget Adjustment Act, I don't suspect that we're going to get to that much before 2:30. So just either make yourself wicked comfortable or have a cup of coffee and come on back. And if we start earlier than that, we'll let you know. So with that, Kathleen, please join us. And we shared, I believe we shared the letter that you sent to us last week is on our website with the support letter for the budget adjustment, having the 3.9 million put into the Budget Adjustment Act.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So welcome back.
Thank you. And thank you for accommodating my schedule last week and allowing me to join this week. For the record, my name is Kathleen Burke. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Housing Authority, and joining me today is my colleague, Chris Trombley, who is our Managing Director of Housing and Community Development. So I would love to get a share screen, and I'll try not to fumble this too much as we start it.
Can you make Kathleen a closer comment? Okay. Thank you.
And here we go. So I really tried to make my presentation today relevant to this committee. Vermont State Housing Authority is a bit unique in the work that we do and the work of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, who you all have already heard from and you hear from pretty routinely. But I'll move forward with my presentation, and if folks have questions as I'm presenting, feel free to interrupt and I can answer those questions as we move along. So again, who we are, some of this may sound familiar from a presentation that I provided last year, but again, our enabling legislation can be found at Title 24, Chapter 113, 24 VSA. Our mission is to ensure that quality, affordable housing opportunities are available to Vermonters statewide. The core of the programs of the authority are strongly impacted by actions at the federal level. HUD Section 8 and Continuum of Care homeless assistance programs and the housing programs of USDA Rural Development are funded by acts of Congress. The VSHA is not a department of state government, but referred to as a quasi-governmental body whose enabling statute permits it to own and operate affordable housing. The Board of Commissioners are appointed by the governor of the state of Vermont and confirmed by the Vermont Senate. Even though we are a quasi-state agency who predominantly administers allocations of federal funding for housing and urban development, we also administer several programs on behalf of a number of state agencies here in Vermont. During fiscal year 2023, we administered a total of $3.3 million in funds, housing assistance funds to Vermonters. The sources of those funds were a little over $1 million from Housing Subsidy Plus Care, which is administered under a grant agreement with the Vermont Department of Health. $200,000 for a program called Bridge to Hopwa, and that's under the terms of a grant agreement with the Department of Health. About $92,000 under the terms of a grant agreement with the Department of Children and Families Economic Services to provide housing inspections for rental assistance programs that OEO deploys. About $1.1 million under the Mobile Home Infrastructure Repair Program. That's under the terms of a grant agreement with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And then about $777,000 under the terms of a grant agreement with the Department of Children and Families Office of Economic Opportunity. The Landlord Relief Program, as folks may recall, is a risk pool fund that landlords can access.
And so can you just go back to that? So the last two numbers we've heard a lot about, well, in particular, we've heard about the Mobile Home Infrastructure Repair Program. Will you be returning to that?
I will.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So our major source of funding comes from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. During fiscal year 2023, VSHA administered a total of $107 million in federally funded housing assistance to Vermonters. About $29 million of that was one-time COVID emergency rental assistance benefits. Our programs collectively touch more than 9,000 families in every community in Vermont. The core programs of the Vermont State Housing Authority include our Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. Included in the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program are a number of targeted funding programs where we're targeting resources to very specific populations. Those populations include a program referred to as the Family Unification Program. These are households that have DCF involvement. Our Foster Youth to Independence Program. These are households exiting foster care. Emergency housing vouchers. This resource is targeted to homeless households and victims of domestic violence. Stability vouchers. Again, these subsidies are targeted to homeless households. Our 811 Mainstream program. These resources are targeted to households with disabilities. Our Veteran Supportive Housing Program. Again, that's an initiative with the VA Medical Center where we target resources to homeless veterans. We have a Family Self-Sufficiency Program, which is a program by which we incentivize program participants to become economically self-sufficient, working with them over a period of 5 to 7 years. They have a one-on-one case manager with the goal of exiting the rental assistance program and becoming financially independent. We also have a homeownership program. The homeownership program, families can choose to use their, what would normally be a Section 8 rental assistance subsidy for mortgage assistance. We also have a very large Section 8 project-based voucher program. That program leverages new and existing housing units for program participants. These housing units are often financed by the Vermont Housing Finance Agency and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. We have a large project-based rental assistance initiative, continuum of care homeless programs. We have a property and asset management division where we manage property for our nonprofit affiliate, the Housing Foundation, Inc. We also manage 19 mobile home parks across the state of Vermont. Other programs administered for state agencies: the Mobile Home Infrastructure Repair Program, referred to as MER, our Landlord Relief Program, referred to as LRP. Again, programs administered for state agencies. I touched on this a few slides back. But again, for the Office of Economic Opportunity, we provide housing inspections. For the Department of Mental Health, we administer a housing and subsidy plus care program. For the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, we administer a HOPWA program.
And that stands for?
Housing Opportunity for People with AIDS. The Department of Health, our Bridge to HOPWA program. Why we were created, and this is from our enabling legislation. The State Housing Authority is created for the purpose of improving housing conditions and facilities through federal resources and assistance in the field of low rent housing and private accommodations. Sorry. Voucher statistics. Again, when I refer to voucher statistics, I'm referring to our Housing Choice Voucher program that I spoke about earlier. Housing vouchers are targeted to households with incomes at 30% of AMI and below. In Burlington, a one-person family would earn no more than $23,000 a year. A two-person family would earn no more than $27,300 a year. Income eligibility for assistance is limited to households with incomes at 50% of area median income. Success rates of families issued vouchers to secure housing is 20%. We talked a lot about this last year, and this correlates directly to the housing shortage and the fact that families are having a very hard time finding affordable housing.
That means success rate for finding a place, not for what happens when they have a voucher and they find a place.
So the success rate is specifically the number of voucher participants who are able to secure housing to bring a unit under a lease agreement. So if we were to issue 100 vouchers at one point in time, 20 families would be successful, and the other 80 families would not be successful.
And they have to return those vouchers after a set amount of time. After
a set amount of time, those vouchers get returned to the Housing Authority and get reissued to the waiting list.
And if that same percentage, does that affect the annual issuance or funding from the federal government or whoever pays for these, the state or the federal government who pays for these vouchers?
We don't earn any administrative fees for issuing vouchers. The way that we earn our fees from the federal government is when we bring a housing unit under contract. And so for every unit, every voucher that we have leased, we earn a fee. And that's how we earn our fees.
Do we have to give back vouchers to the federal government, or do they lower the number that they would fund?
So the way that our budget is funded now, this changed within the last 15 years, but for the past 15 years, the way that Congress has funded our budget is based on what we spend the prior year. And so our 2022 budget established the base for our 2023 budget, and then there's an inflation factor applied to that. This past year, for 2023, we received a 10% inflation factor, and that was to compensate for the increase in housing costs that were happening around the country. Okay, and so we are a high-performing housing agency. We typically come within 3 to 5% of what our budget is. We have a $33 million a year budget for administration of the voucher program, and we typically come within 2 to 5% of reaching the maximum spend. We can't spend over. If we spend over, then we have to find resources elsewhere to fund the overage.
Thank you.
The average subsidy today provided to families is $793 per family. That's per month per family. In January of 22, the average subsidy was $698 per family per month. Our trend line, as we look to the future, is that by May of 2024, our average subsidy will exceed $831 a month. This is important for a variety of reasons. One, it touches on the budget question, Representative Stevens, that you just raised, and that, again, the way that our budget is funded to administer this program is based on what we spent the prior year, combined with an inflation factor that's applied to that. We don't expect there to be much of an inflation factor applied to the 24 budget. As you all know, we continue to operate under a continuing resolution federally. So currently, our budget is based on 2023 allocations. So I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Oh, it's fine. So just a quick one. 20% of people are able to use their vouchers. How does that affect the, thank you, 33 million that you are using for administration? In other words, are you basically doing 100% of your work because you're qualifying 100% of the people and it's just like only 20 of them are finding a place for that to land? Or is the fact that 80% of them aren't finding vouchers reducing your workload?
It's not reducing our workload. The fact that our success rate is 20% increases the administrative work that our agency has to bring those units under contract. Right. And so, and that's not work that we're paid for. And so, again, we're incentivized to bring vouchers under contract. We want vouchers to be used for a variety of reasons. Our mission is to serve low-income families with housing, but that's also how we earn our fees. And that's how we pay our staff. That's how we keep our doors open. And so when you have a low success rate like 20%, it means that we're spending a lot of time and energy administratively to bring a voucher unit under contract. If our success rate was 75%, like it was 4 years ago, before the pandemic, that scenario, we were doing less work and the administrative cost of issuing vouchers was much less. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I follow from that you're doing quite a bit of work involved with the 80% of people who then never are able to redeem the voucher. There's a lot of work associated with that group.
You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So again, back to the budget conversation. Federal fund our budget based on X amount of money, and they'll provide us that funding for the new year. If our per unit costs increase as projected to $831, it means we'll serve fewer families. So they're not funding each voucher at that rate. They're giving us a pool of money. It's like you've got X amount of money in the checkbook and you can support as many families as you can with the money that's allocated. So as we see our per unit costs increase because of increased housing costs, and we're going into a scenario where likely the 24 budget will be level funded. If we're lucky, this statistic tells me we're going to be serving fewer people.
And that number, regardless of what it is represents 70% of a rental cost,
That's correct.
up to 70%.
Well, so the housing assistance payment or the subsidy amount is typically 70% of a family's income.
right. But there's a cap, there's a HUD cap.
And we're going to get to that.
Great.
So I wanted to touch on the work that we've done in the homeless space. Again, units dedicated to homeless families. 360 project-based vouchers have been committed to 51 housing communities. Since January 2020, 212 project-based vouchers have been committed to 25 housing communities. We have a pipeline currently. We've made commitments for Section 8 project-based vouchers to an additional 64 units that will go into 5 housing communities. The value of this commitment is a little over $4 million in operating income a year to these properties.
Yep.
Just a clarifying question. So just looking at your slide, it says 360 project-based vouchers committed to 51 housing communities. So are the January 2020 212 project-based vouchers a subset of those 360 or in addition to?
A subset of.
Okay.
What I was trying to illustrate is since January 2020,
Yep.
we made a commitment of 212, which is pretty substantial.
Yep. Thank you.
And just a quick definition of project-based versus the other personal-based.
Sure. So under the scope of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and if you remember my earlier slide where I was illustrating various components of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, a component of that is our project-based voucher program, where we as a housing agency can elect to designate a percentage of our Housing Choice Voucher units. Those are the portable housing units, are typically issued to a family who searches and finds an apartment of their choice. As a housing agency, we can dedicate a certain percentage of our Housing Choice Voucher allocation to the project-based voucher initiative. And we have elected to do that. We currently have a little over 1,000 units, voucher units, dedicated to our project-based voucher initiative.
So again, to be clear, that's a voucher that stays with the unit.
That is a voucher that stays with a unit, typically for a 20-year period of time. The families who reside in those units have rights to continued assistance after 1 year. So they move into the unit, they're required to be there for a year. And if they choose to move, they can come back to the housing agency and request a portable voucher. So it's not the type of project-based assistance where you receive the assistance provided you live at the property, and if you move, you lose the assistance. You are eligible for continued assistance, and then that housing unit continues to receive the project-based voucher benefit for the next family.
Does their income get revisited like every year or?
Yes, a family's income is recertified on an annual basis, and then if there are changes in the family's income, either upward or downward, they report that change, and we do a subsidy recalculation to determine how the right level that they should be assisted.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then to jump ahead if I can. So when we talk, if there were nonprofit or individuals who have vouchers, who receive vouchers, or there's places where these 360 project-based vouchers are, if those tenants are behind on their rent, they're behind on the 30% piece, not on the 70% piece, obviously, because,
That's a guaranteed.
right, so when we talk about how much does it cost to retain a tenancy when it comes to people who have vouchers and able to live, secure housing, it comes to the 30% of the rent. So if it's $1,000 a month, they're on the hook for 300.
That's correct.
Okay, so when we think about, committee, when we think about the numbers that Kathleen presented to us last week, about the numbers have gone up in the last 4 years from $2,000 a month as an average to almost $5,600 a month in back rent. And part of that's due to the number of people that we're serving or that we're counting, and also the increases in rent and the increases in the missing of rent.
That's correct. So this slide illustrates the 2-bedroom voucher allowed rents. When I was in committee last week, I'm not sure who asked the question about rents, but I thought I would slide this in. So again, this is for the state of Vermont. Each county has its unique, what I refer to as a voucher payment standard. These are the maximum rents that we would allow in each of these counties for a 2-bedroom unit. Now, our schedule encompasses an efficiency all the way through to a 5-bedroom unit for every county of the state. But for purposes of this illustration, I wanted to share this. And again, these amounts are derived based on HUD's published fair market rents, which come out on October 1st of every year. And then we do our comparability analysis, looking at each jurisdiction in the state to determine the level in which we need to set our standards at, or our rent caps at, to assure that families participating in our rental assistance programs have access to decent, safe, and sanitary housing, and that they can compete in that market.
Is a Washington County exception town?
So that this is the city of Montpelier, this is Waterbury, and the valley towns, Waitsfield, Warren, Fayston.
And you're accepted one.
Very difficult areas to lease. Housing is much more expensive in those towns within Washington County than other towns. So again, that just illustrates the work that we do to ensure that our rent standards provide access to housing throughout the entire state.
Let's try to see what the delta is between those $50 now. In Washington and the exception towns.
So leaving the voucher program discussion, moving into the mobile home improvement and repair program. So a little bit of a refresher for this group. The mobile home improvement and repair program, or MER1, was funded initially using ARPA funds in January of 23. The original allocation is illustrated here. Moving forward, MER2, which was funded last session as part of Act 81, provided an additional $4 million to MER. This was general fund dollars. I'm optimistic that we'll enter into a grant agreement with DHCD in February of 2024. This is just next month. So these funds have been allocated but have not yet been awarded to us. With the new infusion of funds, we anticipate the MER program will run through December of 2025. So some uses of this program included mobile home repair. So we've had 81 homeowners receive an award. The average award was about $8,700, and we've paid out a little over $708,000 to date under this particular component of MER.
Is that an example of one of the repairs?
Chris, is this okay?
Okay.
And does the application process include whether or not, much like with the weatherization program, is there the study of the unit done to determine whether or not those fixes will hold?
Yes, and actually, this has been quite a conversation that we've been having with DHCD and other stakeholders over the course of the last year since we've been administering the program. And so certain thresholds of repairs will require an on-site inspection, particularly to validate the work that is being requested and to make sure that it's a wise public investment, right? But, we have found that there are situations where, perhaps investing $20,000 in a roof repair for a home just is not a good public investment because what's underneath the roof is substandard or dilapidated. And so having to consider tough decisions such as that, I would really like to see this program be able to consider funds for home replacement in instances where we've determined that $20,000 investment of putting a new roof on a dilapidated substandard home is just not a good use of public dollars. This is something that I have had conversations with Gus Seelig, director at the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, as well as the team at the Department of Housing and Community Development, but it is a void in the program right now.
Great, thank you.
So moving on, another component is foundation grants. So we have put in a number of new foundation for beneficiaries. We've installed a total of 30 to date. The average award was a little over $13,000 for foundation work. And year to date, we've deployed approximately $390,000 for foundation grants. And then the third use is infill and capital improvement. And this is really preparing a lot to receive a new or used mobile home. The number of lots benefited to date is 49. The average total award is a little over $11,000, with total awards to date of a little over $551,000.
And that would exclude any of the slabs.
I'm going to defer to Chris. Chris, would you like to state your name for the record and respond?
Chris Trombley, Vermont State Housing Authority. So to answer the question, the prior slide of the Home Foundation Awards are for homeowners only. The infill awards, a park owner can utilize those funds for site prep. They can, there's an expansive list of uses, whether they want to add amenities, sewer, electrical fixes, slabs usually are in place, but that could be
I see, but more divided in terms of, is it a park? Improving their infrastructure could involve slabs, or for homeowners is kind of slab only program. Thank you.
And we threw in a demographic slide, and this is specific to the MER program. Again, this illustrates of the folks that have received grants under the Mobile Home Infrastructure Repair Program. This illustrates the 252 households are considered disabled households, and you'll see a number of them are they are elderly and disabled households. You see there's a significant number of children residing in these households as well, and again, households that benefited from MER grants. Did you have a question, Beres, or just trying to
No,
make
I'm just trying to
sense of
see.
that? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault, it's my eyes' fault.
So based on current spend rates for MER, funds are expected to be depleted in December 2025.
It's a popular stock photo. This-
Yeah. You seen it before?
I imagine you might see it again.
Okay, yeah. So MER 1 is forecast to run out of funds in November 2024. MER 2, which is funded by general fund dollars, in December of 2025. And I'll mention that H 719 requests an appropriation of $2 million to keep program operational beyond December of 2025. Any questions on MER before I leave the mobile home infrastructure repair program? Okay. Now moving into the landlord relief program. Again, this is a partnership with the Agency of Human Services, Office of Economic Opportunity, to operate a $5 million program using general funds. This was for up to a 2-year period, but based on our burn rate or spend rate within the program, that grant agreement with the Office of Economic Opportunity will be extended. So again, this is a risk pool program or a mitigation program, and critical tools in developing a supportive network of resources for a healthy rental market. Again, this particular program is made available to landlords who agree to a rent to a family with subsidy. And so the idea is that the risk pool is there to provide for, mitigation efforts, be it unpaid rent, be it damages, those kinds of things. So if you're a landlord and you're hesitant to rent to a family, that this program will make a difference, and that has proven itself.
But not for back rent.
Not for back rent. It does not pay rent arrearage.
This is a promise by VSHA or others or OEO to say, we understand you may be taking a risk mostly physically in the apartment and worried that a security deposit may not be enough to cover, but this is something to actually cover programs. This is telling the property owner, we have funds to help if the destruction is too much, but this is only for people who are receiving a subsidy. This isn't for general rent population.
That's correct. And so I use the general term subsidy because it's not just a housing choice voucher program subsidy. It could be a HOP subsidy. It could be any form of subsidy that a family might be enjoying. So this program would compensate landlords for tenants receiving subsidy.
Can I just ask a quick question? When a landlord agrees to take on a voucher program or sign up for the voucher program, does that come with a security deposit?
The program does not fund a security deposit. The security deposit has to be paid by the family, like a private renter.
Oh, it does have to be paid by a family. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, because I was going to ask whether this is sort of in lieu of a security deposit.
No, and so the funds are there to assist low-income renters with security deposits. Oftentimes, that's an impediment for a renter to be able to bring to rent a unit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I just want to say my vision that should the rent arrearage program be funded as part of the BAA, that would be operationalized through the landlord relief program.
If I'm not mistaken, when we talked about this last year, these were the same rules that we had, or similar rules, maybe not the exact same, but similar rules to how we approached this with the CRF funds in 2020. Is that?
That's right. And the legislation that was passed as part of S-100 actually provides some guardrails for the administration of the rent arrearage program. So this slide, I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. So this slide just gives the committee a sense of where the landlord relief funds are going across the state. And so, you know, a large portion, $145,000 out to Franklin County. I was surprised at the Orleans metric, but $150,000 headed out to Orleans County. These are funds that have already been paid. And you'll see that, you know, we've received a total request from 469 applicants, approved 211 of those. So again, a number, and I spoke to this last week, a number of folks coming to this program are also requesting rent arrearage benefits, but because the landlord relief program does not provide for the funding of rent arrearage, those applications are denied. And this slide illustrates the uses of the landlord relief program. You'll see a significant amount of funds have been used to pay for damages. So a deposit to start work would be releasing a small amount of funds and then allowing the landlord to get started on that, perhaps because of the scope of damage is such that they needed to have an infusion of cash on the front end. The legal court costs line item this relates to evictions. Although we don't pay for non-payment of rent, the program does pay for court costs related to evictions. So that number is up there. And then this is really interesting, the vacancy loss hold. This is something that we did with the Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program with VRAP, and has really been successful in allowing families to secure a unit. We provide a security deposit to the owner to hold the unit for 30 days. And so the rental market is so tight, and owners are oftentimes not waiting for a tenant for 30 days to move in. They want the operating income, the rental income on the spot, and so they're not willing to wait. This program is able to provide that vacancy loss hold payment to the landlord, holding the unit for that tenant with subsidy to move in at a future date. Here we go again. The landlord relief program, based on our current spend rates and uses, funds are forecast to be depleted in April 2027. So again, if we don't expand the uses of this program, we have quite a runway with the allocation that was originally provided. Moving into the outlook for 2024, I touched on this bit at the start of my presentation concerning operating under a continuing resolution based on fiscal year 23 funding levels. Industry professionals are seeing flat funding for HUD-assisted programs as a best outcome. Flat funding equates to a budget decrease. Challenge to assist new families off the waiting list, and challenge to make commitments for project-based vouchers to new housing developments as we move into 2024 and 2025.
Quick question on units. You're allowed to own units, VSHA?
Yes, we are.
And so those are ones that range in size from multi-floor, multi-units to regular looking housing. Is that whatever you deem fit to buy to turn into a unit that will be then voucher run? Is that?
The Vermont State Housing Authority can own and operate housing, but the Vermont State Housing Authority does not do that. The Vermont State Housing Authority has always worked through its captive nonprofit, the Housing Foundation, Inc. And it's the Housing Foundation, Inc. that has been the ownership entity and the development entity for affordable housing acquisition that benefits the Vermont State Housing Authority. The Vermont State Housing Authority manages the housing owned by the Housing Foundation, Inc.
Thank you.
And so the Vermont State Housing Authority goals and initiatives as we move through 2024. None of this requires an ask from any of you. It's just letting you folks know that these are our goals as we move forward to become a one-stop shop for renters and landlords. To streamline the administration of rental assistance programs with the Agency of Human Services. I think you have all heard a lot of testimony about the different rental assistance programs, and there's different entities administering those, be it the HOP program that OEO administers and programs that it's very complex and overly so. And so
Coordinated entry system.
this is not, well, coordinated entry plays into this, but I think my objective is to, and again, you know, talking with Rep. Stevens and Representative Woods over the past, months, and also being a part of many committee discussions, there's a perception that there's a lot of duplication of rental assistance funds being provided. And I don't agree with that. I think that there is a lot of rental assistance being provided that's being deployed by a number of different entities. But each of those entities have their own criteria and targets. And so, but it's overly complicated. It's overly complicated for me to understand, for practitioners to understand, and then more importantly, for the beneficiaries that the resource is intended is incredibly confusing. Where do I go for assistance? Where do I go for rental assistance? A goal, an objective that I have is to try to streamline that process. And let's decide on who the administrator should be. I'm not saying it should be the Vermont State Housing Authority. Maybe it should be the Office of Economic Opportunity, but I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, right? To streamline administration of rental assistance programs. To develop a universal, easy-to-use online application for rental assistance. To develop a statewide waiting list for use by all public housing providers. This is something I've heard from a lot of stakeholders about, and the need to have one waiting list, a simple application, one application where folks can simply go online and apply anywhere they want to live in Vermont using one portal, one application. This is what I envision with this objective. And then lastly, as part of this portal that we're developing, to begin developing a voluntary renter registry where we would ask landlords to voluntarily register their rental units through this portal. Again, Vermont State Housing Authority serves 9,000 households throughout the state of Vermont. We have a very, very large landlord database. The administration of the Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program, its predecessor, the Rental Housing Stabilization Program. We have a very, very, very large landlord database, both private and for-profit. And so I think we have the information and data available to us to really make some headway on this initiative. So again, it's a goal of our agency as we move through 2024 to accomplish these things. Thank you. That's all I have for you.
Representative Lamont.
Thank you. Question, the database that you are working to is that is going to be strictly for your program, your organization only?
My vision is that it's a one-stop shop for all affordable housing providers in the state, public housing authorities, nonprofits, any entity that administers affordable housing.
Are you familiar with the Find Help database? So there's a new database that's being created that it's been implemented in other places. But essentially, I heard you mention like the overlapping of assistance and such. So this portal is being implemented as a resource navigation hub throughout the state. And so there's healthcare providers, all the things, so that providers can communicate with each other in this database, and consumers and people can access information and help streamline the things. So I didn't know if that's something, because so many other human resource folks are gonna be using this, it might be helpful for your folks so that y'all are all communicating in the same.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Is that an initiative that has started here in Vermont?
Yes,
Okay,
What's it called again?
find help.
find help.
I
Okay,
think it's
thank you.
findhelp.org.
Thank you. Definitely. Let's into that.
You know, who's organizing that?
Yeah, actually, I think it started in Massachusetts or New Hampshire, but right now, in Lamoille County, it's being transitioned from the resource navigation page to the Find Help, and there's another community in Vermont that's using it, and I'm not sure, I think it may be Springfield.
Okay.
But I don't remember who.
I'll do some research. Thank you for
Yes.
sharing that. I may circle back to you for more information.
Yes, well, because this is the problem that happens across the state, across agencies, across networks. And if all of you don't know who's going to which agency to get which services. And this way it just helps everybody be in communication. And you're like, and then also you can say, oh, well, you didn't access this resource. Why don't you try here first and then come back to, you know what I mean?
I
So it just
completely
makes
agree.
everyone's life a little bit better.
Great.
And that's a different facet of the conversation of the, part of the BAA conversation of the money that or the programming that we wanted to see from CVOEO, which was to then take something like this, but make it what we were calling last year a soft handoff. So it wasn't just, here's a website, figure it out yourself. It's like, here's a website, let's go through it and see how this can help you. So
If you have someone that can help you, that will do an instruction tutorial too.
all right, any further questions for Kathleen at this time?
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, thank you for we have your letter from last week supporting the BAA, and
Yeah.
that'll be important. Yeah,
I thought I heard it on the radio and I just looked it up, but you can also access Find Help through 211 in that way. So,
Perfect. Thank you.
all right, committee, let's come back. We're going to switch gears to 2:15, of course. We need to take a break. We're all, well, I know. Do not go get a cup of coffee. Representative President.